How's my audio coming through, Josh? Oh, and before I forget, you're on like a 20-second delay right now. This is what I timed before, so if I'm super slow in getting back to this, that's why. This is what I timed before. I don't know if you heard me before, Josh, but can you let me know how the audio is coming through? Alright, good afternoon everybody. I'm going to kick off here in about 5 more minutes, try and keep at that 2 o'clock Central Time mark. So if you're here, thank you already for joining in, but I will get kicked off here in about 3 more minutes. Alright, Kathleen, thank you for the note. That's really creepy that you're just watching me from many miles away. Actually, anybody, if you don't mind, please, I do have chat enabled for this video. If you don't mind, please just leave a comment, your name and what agency you're from. It will help me do a little bit of tracking on my end to see how far this reach went. And I might be reaching out to all of you as well, just to see how this all goes. This is the first live stream I've ever done, professionally or privately. I really want to thank Josh Wolk with the North Dakota Forest Service for helping me out with some of this fine tuning and stuff. So this is going to be a 2-part exercise. The primary is going to be going through this hazard mitigation plan, but secondary, I want to see how viable it's going to be not only for my office, but for other offices in the county to start having meetings like this. I'm very happy that none of you can see the catastrophe that is beneath me, that is cords and wires and computers, but trying to focus how to use some of this technology to reach more folks out there. As we are nearing that starting point, I do just want to do a little bit of housekeeping along with that. Please, everyone, you have my email. Let me know how things are going. If you can hear me all right, if the visuals work well for you. As I turn, as I present, what works and does not. Right now my microphone is off of my laptop. I heard there's a little bit of white noise in the background. For that, I do apologize. I'm surrounded by maintenance rooms and elevators, and the screen putting off a ton of heat and big fan running, so I do apologize for that. That is something that I want to work on in the future. I do have chat popped up here in front of me. I'm going to be doing my best to monitor both of it. I'm figuring I'm on about a 20 to 30 second delay, and for that I apologize if it looks like I'm steamrolling through something. I will do my best to split my attention between the two if any questions do pop up. Otherwise, if I just glass over you, please, no offense intended at all. I'll try and go back through at the very end and do a little recap for any issues. All of that being said, I'm going to dive in. Hopefully we'll have a few more members of the public chime in as well. So everyone who is here, thank you very much for your time, for your support. I'm hoping we can wrap this up in 20 to 30 minutes just because I know y'all are very busy and I want to keep this concise. This is going to be part 1 of the plan for Pembina County. we're going to be looking at all of the areas outside of the incorporated cities. Tomorrow, same time, same place, I hope to be doing a second presentation of those cities, diving in a little bit deeper to each one of our communities and a few points of interest in the area. If you can come back for that, that's wonderful. Otherwise, I'm hoping that I can take some lessons learned here today and apply it to tomorrow. All of that being said, we are looking at the hazard mitigation plan. This is a plan I update every 5 years to apply for more mitigation funding. It takes about 5 years of work to make it all happen, reach out with a bunch of partners, and we'll get into all of that as we move on. Those of you that do not know, I am Andrew Kirking. I'm the emergency manager here in Pembina County. 50% job, the rest of my time I spend doing weed control. Not the fun weed that all you Colorado Femites are talking and dealing with. Noxious weeds that deal with agriculture up here in the state of North Dakota. As I mentioned, we're doing a hazard reduction and threat reduction plan. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It's every 5 years. This plan is intended to be a tool, but if nothing else, hopefully I can get a little bit of cash out of the deal. Wonderful. Thank you again, guys. Talking about the funding, this is a partnership here at the local level with the cities, some of our community groups, with the states, and of course with the federal government. This funding is open to the cities, to the county, and to the community groups like the park boards. I've worked quite a bit. We got a project most of the way there. It hasn't quite happened yet with the park board for the city of Walhalla. They're very interested in a storm shelter, and this is exactly the kind of funding help they need to make something like this happen. We're looking at reducing the threat to our communities. Storm shelters are a big one up here, the operations planning, updating all of our infrastructure, and the important part, that's 75% cost share. So breaking down some of the major threats and hazards that we have here in Pembina County. We're very blessed. I actually get to get bored sometimes during the year, but this is what keeps me up at night. Threats are, of course, man-made. We have a lot of hazardous materials around here, whether it's fuel, whether it's agricultural products. We have many state highways and an interstate running through, so we have a lot of stuff moving through our small little communities. And dam failures. Back in the 50s, the 60s, there was a very intricate system of levees and dams to help with flood control up here. They've worked great, they continue to work great, but they are getting old. And we've come to expect these to protect our communities, our homes, and without those or some kind of failure, it's going to end up hurting a lot of people. And that is another major threat that we look at up here. The hazards, this is more the natural happenings that just occur around. And of course, this is storms, dealing with the floods, and wildfire being the big elements that we look at. Our mission here, we have the purpose of minimizing that vulnerability of the life and the health of the people. People always come first. After that, we're looking at property, the environment, and our economy. And digging into with the natural, the technological hazards and threats, those being more of the man-made issues that we and a lot of people deal with. Breaking that into our goals, we want to enhance the county and the city's planning. We understand that having that plan is great. It looks wonderful on a shelf. But I've seen time and time again, this planning process is what brings people together and helps us think ahead about how we're going to handle things. So the process, to me, is golden in this. We want to work with enhancing the public's awareness. Hopefully that's something that I can do today and tomorrow. And then we want to reduce those hazards on the future development. It's wonderful in a small community around here. I grew up in this area and I kept hearing the town is dying, the county is dying. And I look around now and I see homes being built and new neighborhoods and all the rest, and it's wonderful. We want to make sure that we are planning these developments safely, that we can keep them as far away from threats and hazards as we can, and still let folks live where they want to live. More goals, more breakdowns, and this is getting a little more in the weeds. We want to save the lives, reduce the injuries. As I said before, people come first. People also like stuff, so we want to do what we can to protect their property and to possibly prevent that damage in the first place. Especially around here, in a very agricultural heavy economy, tourism heavy economy, we understand that the environment is critical to the thriving of our citizens. So naturally, we want to keep that as pristine as we're able. We want to make this an integrated policy, not a once-a-year plan. We want to give a tool that our community leaders can use all the time and to reduce those long-term vulnerabilities to the hazards and to the threats that we are going to get into. This is a whole bunch of the folks. I hope I listed all of them. It's been very difficult the last year especially to get all these folks in the same room together, but I've got the greatest job in the world where I can go out and chat with all of these folks any day, pick up a phone, give them a call, and start making these connections. Additional input, we share a border with Canada, we share a border with Minnesota, not only another state, but an entirely different FEMA region. So I've been able to do a lot of work across the river. Unfortunately, across the border hasn't worked well in the past, but we continue to grow those relationships with organizations all around us. A list of the core capabilities. These are the ways that I try and frame my mind about what we're looking at. We touch on a lot of them very in depth, but you can see it's a giant list. They all kind of build off of each other, but hopefully we can break down how each hazard and every one of our mitigation strategies can start addressing some of these. Some of the input that I used, begged, borrowed, stole, came from our hospital emergency plan, other plans that I work on, our economic development, our THIRA, which came at the perfect time, a very, very in-depth and quantitative analysis of these threats and hazards could not have come at a better time for Pembina County. And of course with our Water Resource Board dealing with these dams I was talking about just a little bit earlier. So the natural hazards. Again, this is the acts of God. These are the events or just the physical condition that has the potential to cause the fatalities, the injuries, the things that are going to reduce quality of life, are going to be costly and can hurt or kill people. Talking about human disease, I did not want to beat this to death. We all get beaten to death with it already this past year, but we're looking at the health of the population and going down to the second and sometimes third order effects when it comes to the cancellation of activities, loss of revenue to businesses, and of course mental health, which I think we're seeing more and more of these days as we move further into this pandemic. It does not just have to be COVID-19. These are things that can affect anyone, anytime, anywhere, whether it is a flu moving through a school or chickenpox through a daycare. So many of these things, as different as they are, they still have a major impact to these communities. A couple of them, and these are coming back to those core capabilities, we're looking at transportation. The big one right now, as I said, we share a border with Canada. The amount of international travel and business being done it's taken a huge hit with the closure of that border, and that's just one example. How a disease might impact that critical transportation, mass care. Obviously, you start getting a bunch of sick people, it takes its toll on a community. The logistics, the supply chain, I don't know about you guys, maybe you've seen the cost of a lot of goods, especially by dealing with construction, has gone through the roof. That's that trickle-down effect. What starts as a disease, as a little bug, all of a sudden is affecting development and plans folks have for home improvement, just to use an example. Tying in with that economic recovery too. Couple these increased costs along with the inability for workers to come into work, and it's going to take a huge, huge hit on a small community's economy. More impacts: the natural, the cultural resources. Tourism has taken a big hit around here. Planning. I've talked to a lot of different emergency managers. We all do it a little bit differently. It's been great for me for this relationship building. I've never spent more time in a hospital, in a good way, talking with the public health, and all of these partners I've never had that contact with. It's been wonderful getting to meet these people and start looking ahead and taking the lessons we've learned already and applying them to what's coming down the pike. Op coordination, more of the small picture, what's right in front of us, the coordination with our support agencies, not just public health. Situational assessment, we have great folks at the state. They're helping us track where our numbers are going, where these sicknesses might be coming from, but leaning on our partners to see what else we can bring to the table. And the public information and warning has been a big push again with our public health as we roll out these vaccines, making sure that we're being transparent to our stakeholders and the public, making them aware of what services we can offer. Insect infestation, as I mentioned, huge agricultural economy up here. Any kind of bug rolling through, as soon as that starts affecting crops, 1 or 2 lost fields, that can mean the difference between somebody getting to farm the next year and a bankruptcy. And widespread, it takes a huge impact on the economy, on our elevators, and some of our other co-ops. We also look at the spread of disease to animals and people. These bugs aren't bad enough, just eating all of our food. As soon as they get into our livestock populations or start attacking people, that's a whole other thing to bring up. Logistics and supply chain. Contamination of products, the health and safety is starting to disrupt that ecosystem. Fire management, a disrupted ecosystem, dead plants laying around. It doesn't take much, especially in a drought-like condition that we're in right now. We've had a very dry winter up here, I say as it's raining outside. You start taking these dry conditions and these little bugs start spreading into a new wildfire concern. The economic recovery I touched on with impact to the farmers' yields and to the elevators. Cultural resources, it's not a best, that should be a pest. Might spread to the cultural resources, whether that is an arboretum, a garden exhibit, many other things. We talk about the planning. This is when it comes to ag. I started working with the USDA a lot, made some great partnerships there, and bringing these relief programs for the people that need it most. Op coordination, again, with our support agencies, and the situational assessment is talking to our partners in the private and the public sector, where those damages are at. Moving into the more frequent activities around here, we're going to look at summer weather first. Here's just a few threats that affect us most directly, some, again, more than others. The impacts we see, as I mentioned, we've kind of had this icy, rainy mix. Start looking at the damage to the infrastructure, to the power, critical transportation. I had to drive 45 miles an hour into work today. It's not easy for homeboy to do with this lead foot of mine. Mass care, looking at our stranded drivers, looking at if we need to transport a patient, that extended transport time in rural North Dakota makes a big difference to somebody with a severe illness or severe injury. And logistics and supply chain just ties in to that transportation. Housing impact, naturally, I'm talking about summer weather, I'm talking about ice. Excuse me, guys. It rolls together a little bit, but talking about the housing especially, you get these straight line winds, hail damage, all of the rest. It doesn't take much, especially for somebody lacking insurance or inappropriate insurance, to start looking at that damage to homes. Fire management, we dug into with the with the insect infestation, dry conditions, you get a great lightning strike, all of a sudden our firefighters get a whole lot more busy. And the law enforcement side, they do a great job working with traffic control as we clear this debris, even going out there and being first responders themselves, helping get these communities back on their feet. All right, Marcus, glad you could make it. Just saw you joined in. The impacts are economic recovery, damage to crops, damage to businesses, cultural resources, damage to any of our historical sites up here, our tourism, and with planning. Summertime gets a little bit hairy. It's tough to tell right where that tornado is going to spring up. Our partner at the National Weather Service, they do tremendous work giving us as much lead up as we possibly can. This isn't something great that we can plan for, like a big flood, so we rely on them very heavily for these immediate alerts to help give people that little extra edge, a couple more minutes to get to the storm shelter. All right, I believe this is the last one. The op coordination, working with those partners, working with our dispatch center, making sure we have responders ready to go, that they are safe. Situational assessment, it's the warning area before, and at the end, after the event has gone down, trying to figure out what kind of damage is out there, what needs to get fixed, and all the rest. And of course, public information and warning is key. We've come a long way since I started, when we just had sirens and hope and maybe a text message, to all the work that's been done now with the WEA, the emergency alert system, and all the rest. We've come a long ways, and it's really helping people out. Winter weather, I gave a little spoiler away here, talking about transportation with ice, the freezing rain. Wind chill is huge up here. Historically, knock on wood, we've had a marvelous winter so far, and we've avoided both that wind chill and the extreme cold so far. Now we're talking about ice accumulation, we're talking about ice on the roads, the search and rescue. We had a missing person here a week or two ago. It was a nice day. It was 25 degrees out, which is beautiful for Pembina County in the wintertime. But we had homeboy wander off, and thank goodness it was during the day. Thank goodness we were able to find him very, very quickly. But it does not take long when that sun goes down that our golden window for search and rescue shrinks in a hurry. Double that, if you do start looking at whiteout, at blizzards, trying to find these stranded cars, it ends up being hugely taxing on our first responders. And of course, the mass care services, the emergency housing of people getting stranded out there, people displaced from their homes. Logistics ties back into the transportation. Housing we touched on a little bit too, damage to homes, to property with accumulating snow or ice. Fire management, fire in the wintertime is horrible, and we also have a lot of our guys doubling up their efforts. You'll have firefighters going out ahead of our city crews, clearing away of downed debris so that those city crews can get out, fix the power lines, fix the water, what they may need. Law enforcement, wonderful for the search and rescue, understanding the road conditions, absolutely invaluable. Cultural resources, and the planning. Wintertime, it's a lot easier. I've been tracking the storm we're dealing with around here. I think out in Bismarck, somebody was saying earlier, it's been windier than a cob out there. I've been tracking this for the last 3 or 4 days. Never used to happen. This stuff used to just spring up on us maybe a day ahead of time. So what the Weather Service has done has been absolutely incredible, making my job a whole lot easier. Finally, that operational coordination, the assessment, working together, getting those warnings out, and making sure that people can make informed decisions. If they're not plugged in by themselves, hopefully I can be one more avenue saying, put the winter survival kit in your car, pick up extra peanut butter or a 12-pack before you go home and get stranded, and keeping our responders as well as the public informed. Fire is pretty straightforward, but like everything else, I can make something very simple and I can branch it out into several different columns. The fire impacts, generally very straightforward. We talk about structural fire or damage to infrastructure, critical transportation. A few years ago, we had some major ditch fires. Visibility was almost nil, brought traffic to a standstill. The last thing you want to be doing when there's fire on either side of you is not being able to move. Mass care services, whether that's somebody displaced by a fire, whether that is many people burned up that all of a sudden need very intensive medical care. Having the ambulance and EMS and the whole hospital service available to them to help care for those folks. Housing, we work very closely with our social services, with our public health if we need to set up a shelter. Fire management, of course, they do a thing or two with fire. Our law enforcement does a great job supporting these fire suppression, whether that's traffic control or staging or logistics, planning ahead of time. We work with some of our larger buildings, our larger industries, work with the state fire marshal to do hazard assessments, whether that is just an evacuation plan or whether that is how they can make their building more resilient against accidental fires. We can do a lot ahead of time to help reduce that threat. Op coordination, situational awareness ties in more with the wildfire side of things. We've been more or less on the edge of a drought for the last 2 or 3 years, and wildfire's been a big thing up here. We've run a very successful information campaign with the public and with help from the state fire marshal to help inform people how they can reduce their impact. Burning in dry conditions and all the rest ties in with the public information and the warning. Flood, I could spend the rest of this slideshow talking about flood up here. Even better if it loads for me. Riverine flooding, we see a little bit of dam failure, of course we've talked about and we'll talk about more. The aerial flooding is a big issue around here. It's so flat around here you watch your dog run away for 3 days. So a little bit of water goes a long, long way around here. Fortunately, it means we're not as at risk at flash floods, but certainly still something that we consider up here. Rather than digging into every single impact for a flood, especially these big aerial floods, it takes a huge toll across the county, across all industries, across all core capabilities. We've gotten very good at planning ahead, at responding to this, but we've got a lot of bases to cover. The prediction tools, much like the weather, have gotten much, much better. These are a couple of the services that I get to use in conjunction with the weather service and the USGS. Start giving me a picture about what might be coming down the pike. This AHPS has been a great tool, especially lately. Our weather service here, our office, has put a ton of effort into this tool. Spring and Water Resources Outlook, talking about just how much water is in the soil, how much it can take up, and of course the significant river flood outlook. We deal with 3 really major rivers in Pembina County, the Red certainly being its own little beast, so we lean very heavy on that tool as well. I brought this up. These are some of our flood reporting stations, river gauges. We've got one down by Drayton, Pembina, this little guy here in Emerson, just across the border. And I should say, for some of our visitors not familiar with the area, this river is very silly. It flows completely the wrong direction that it should. And we start looking at temperature shift with the south warming up before the north. That tends to be our big Bearcat. That's the Red River of the north. We've got 2 more stations, one in Nitchie, one in Walhalla, and further back up into Canada, we've got another little guy up here, which does a great job of predicting just how much water we might be seeing coming into our system. Tongue River, this is Icelandic State Park, the very last dam that we have in our dam network that helps protect Cavalier, community of Bathgate, and naturally helps control the flow of water, where this Pembina River up north, Tongue River centrally, converge before flowing into this goofy north flowing river. God help it. This, my squiggles will go away, but this is what those stream gauges look like. Gives us a great breakdown of what the level is at. This was taken a day or two ago, so you can see there's not much change. When it comes time into a flood, when we see a lot of motion in the river, they do their best. This is that hydrologic outlook. They'll give me a couple of different scenarios of where that river might go and what my percentages are, so we can plan ahead of time where our sandbags need to go, where generators need to go, and what pumps need to get fired up. This is the information that we try and pass on to the public. These are the alerts we can send out. Generally, they just tend to fluctuate between the watch, between the warning. Flood is wonderful. You can see it coming from a mile away and help predict it, but we do want to help keep the public informed, especially some of our snowbirds that spend the winter away from their home, and now they need to worry if they need to come back, fire up the sump pump, or throw a few more sandbags. Flash flood, we will see a little bit about, and the urban flooding affects maybe a city or two, but this is something that's affected it forever, and the residents in city works are very well equipped to handle these small little floods. Dam failure, I kept promising to come back to it. Hopefully you can see well enough on the left side of the screen. Each one of these little pink squares are some of the dams here in Pembina County, and these are the major ones. There's a bunch of little retention structures all over the place, but it's this little cluster right there flowing into Cavalier County that help regulate the amount of water flowing into Cavalier to the Tongue River and eventually up to Pembina for that confluence with the Red River. The other thing, if you're not familiar with the area, everything to the left of that line is actual terrain. There are actually hills in northeast North Dakota. It's marvelous. It's my favorite part about this whole state. Once water starts coming off of that, though, it is able to spread out and fan out into the rest of the county, and that's why those structures are so incredibly important to us. The problem is, if you can see where some of the text gets a little bit bolder, these are dams that have a significant hazard risk. And looking at this guy here, this guy here, this guy here, those are some of the dams up here on this escarpment that help protect the rest of the county. So it gets to be a big deal for us in working closely with our Water Resource Board that these dams will stay intact, that they will serve their purpose and help protect our community. Some of the impacts, as you can imagine, the erosion of roads, the impact on transportation, mass care, especially with the displaced or people that might be injured. We'll start looking at a pollution aspect off of floodwater, the logistics, housing we talked about, and the environmental impact. All floodwater is considered hazardous. So now what do we do with all of the sandbags that were inundated with this stuff? How do we start disposing of this hazardous material? And I know already I'm blown way over my 30-minute mark. I apologize for that. I hope you'll bear with me through this, but I understand I get a little long-winded. More of the dam failure impacts economic recovery. Very flat, very heavy soil. We got farmers, again, can't get to their fields, can't start producing for their families, for the elevators, and for the whole breadbasket of the United States. Planning ahead with this, the coordination, the situational assessment, this is why I get to hang out with Minnesota. That Red River cuts a wide path on both sides. We can meet, we discuss some of this information, what effects we're seeing on both sides, and even start sharing some of our resources. A lot of the towns from west to east in the county, you can almost set your clock by it. If it's in Walhalla, a week later it'll be in Nitchie, and it'll be out. And it's just kind of this moving wave. So sharing resources and working with these communities, these response districts, has been a huge tool. And a great benefit to make my planning a whole lot easier. And then, of course, the public information and warning, like we talked about a little bit before. Those are the flood watches, warnings, flash flood that I send out or the Weather Service sends out. The opposite of the flood, moving into the drought. We've been dancing around this for a long time. A million different ways to define it. Meteorological, it's just drier than normal. Ag drought, too dry for crops. Hydrological, we start losing those levels in our rivers and our lakes, start seeing algae blooms. Socioeconomic drought, now starting to affect people. Now I start getting offended. 100 different ways to say that it's dry out. The big ones that I use is just that percent of normal. Is it drier than last year? Is it drier than our rolling 30-year average? A lot of these other measurements come from our friends with the USDA, with USGS, and we start looking at how it's going to impact our economy with agriculture. Some of the impacts, as you can imagine, dry conditions, they make that poor air quality, fire. It's a banner year for them, job security for a firefighter in a drought. The economic recovery, I keep harping on the ag over and over again. That's with the situational assessment, not only from the economy standpoint, but also the fire management standpoint, and that public information and warning, whether that is where they can get crop and insurance relief, or it's just saying, hey, homie, maybe today isn't the best day for a campfire. We've moved out of the hazards of the natural things that are just part and parcel of being a human being on planet Earth. Now moving into the threats, the man-made hazards. And Homeland Security is very popular in today's day and age, 2020, 2021, but something a lot of people here are very familiar with. We've got 3 ports of entry. One of them is the busiest port of entry from Detroit, Michigan to Seattle, Washington. We see more commercial traffic than any station in between there. We have a huge population of Border Patrol in the green shirts, Border Protection in the blue shirts, and every other federal agency that helps support them. In addition, we've got an Air Force installation, a radar installation that, how can I say this? It's a subset of Grand Forks Air Force Base, the largest wing to the south of us. It brings up many families, many of these young men and women out to serve their community, but it also puts a bullseye on our back when we're the ones monitoring, looking over the horizon at what bad stuff might be flying in. That tends to be a very critical target for some of our adversaries overseas. Civil unrest and protests, coming back down to a more micro view, the domestic terrorism we all see is on the rise, and then that international religious terrorism, or good old-fashioned warfare. Some of the impacts. Again, it's a huge list. Depending on the scale, of the scope, it's going to be devastating to our community. If not for damage or death, just mentally what that does to us. Up here, I'll just try to be Midwest nice. I just wanted to do a little bit of a breakdown for all of our ports of entry. Those of you not familiar with the county, we look like a box with a tummy on it. Walhalla is in the northwest corner, right next to that escarpment we talked a little bit earlier. All of our border stations have been upgraded in the last 10 years, start getting them back up to tech. This is not the busiest one. I'm going to save the busiest for last, but right away you can see the kind of numbers that are flowing through this port. And I left out 2020. It's not fair when the border isn't closed. But for a small community, you start talking about 80,000 people crossing in a single year. That is a huge transient population to be flowing in any given time. Niche is our cute little guy. We're a big fan of it. Now we're talking right, come on buddy, there you go. Right in the middle of our county. This is a big port for folks that might live in the United States but work in Canada, or vice versa. It's kind of this unknown little secret. You don't need to wait in line at the big port. You just hop, skip, and jump on over into the U.S., legally, of course. And you can see the numbers aren't quite as high as before, but for us locals around here, guys like me that wanted to drink before you turned 21, this is a very popular place for that local traffic. And now the big dog. This is Pembina, which, if it'll let me write, we're all the way up in the corner. We're right by the Red River, and this is that confluence of the two rivers moving midway through the county. As I said, this is the busiest port from Michigan to Seattle. How nice of them to put it smack dab in my county and in North Dakota. The reason being, this is Interstate 29, very major corridor right through the heartland, connects all the way down to Kansas or Oklahoma, I believe, before it terminates. But we see all of this commercial traffic coming and going. Personal vehicles are big, of course, but now looking at the truck traffic, over 200,000 unique trucks crossing over, and then the containers even higher than that. Something that I omitted from this, just because it's not on the facility itself, they also deal with rail traffic. There's a rail line somewhere over here, if you bear with me, but they also deal with all the rail traffic coming and going through that port. Their station, they just moved. They had a separate headquarters in the city of Pembina proper. They moved everything out here, and it is a small army of customs and border protection folks out here that work wonderfully with our law enforcement. And this is the Air Force installation that I was talking about. It's that perimeter acquisition radar. We are part of the Space Force, thank goodness. We're finally in the future. And it's that critical target that we talked about. They are completely self-sufficient. They've got their own power. They've got dorms, a whole housing complex. This radar installation built back in the 70s. I hope someone will correct me if I'm off on that. But it is keeping an eye over the horizon effectively across all of Canada. It goes from Hudson Bay through Alberta. Again, please correct me if I'm wrong. And they're tracking upwards of 20,000 unique pieces of space debris every day. These guys are on top of things, and they're critical not only for us as a county, but for Homeland Security at large, for the entire nation. We talked a little bit about transportation incidents with every hazard. I had a hard time trying to make these maps high enough resolution for y'all, but I just wanted to give a brief overview. And the biggest thing is just the amount of roads that we have in our county. The red, you can see, this is our Interstate 29 we talked about. We have, 10 state highways crossing through in the blue that carry all sorts, everything from the ag products to hazardous materials and the rest. We are the only county in the state where all of our county roads are paved. It's a point of pride for myself. I rub into all the other emergency managers in the state. That said, we only have one rail line. That's why I didn't count up here at the border. It tends to trek through Minnesota, which is fine by me. That's one less thing I got to worry about. Is a single rail line, connects communities of Walhalla, Cavalier, Hensel, Crystal. Stop by tomorrow. We'll talk more about those communities. It carries primarily agricultural products, but anytime you're dealing with locomotives with the diesel and the amount of chemicals it takes just to make a train run, it gets to be a big deal. There's also a small chunk of rail. Maybe you've noticed here, these crosshatches as well. This rail line really only supplies the community of Drayton and the major industries there. And this busy looking map is the amount of bridges going on in the county. Like I said, we're super flat. We have to deal with our water as best we can, move it around as best we can. And because of that, we have hundreds of bridges and large culverts to help that water go where we want it to let our cars go where they need to. Looking back into transportation, we've got about 900 miles of road. That's counting paved road, gravel road, all the section lines, dirt lines, trail, anything you can move not only cars and pickups down and semis, but also all of our agricultural implement. So we've got 900 miles of road. We talked about the hundreds of bridges and culverts that we deal with. We've got the one functioning railway, 1.5 if you count the little stretch by Drayton. We've got 3 large airports, large to us, in Pembina, Walhalla, Cavalier. We managed to get our governor's twin-engine plane to land in Cavalier back in 2013. We do have a fair amount of spray pilots, spray coops for spraying of fields. 2 major pipelines. This purple guy got a lovely little rehab this summer. They fixed up this portion and they're going to be going under the Red River hopefully next summer. This one operated by Enbridge, this guy over here, TC Energy, and we've gotten to grow some great relationships with them. 2 major pipelines and a partridge and a pear tree. Even for a small little community, we deal with a lot of transportation and a lot of different modes that we need to keep our head on swivel for. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. Like I said, I apologize. I've been trying to monitor chat. You guys have been pretty quiet on me, and I'm about to lose battery on my camera. So please stick around, stay in chat. I will keep the stream live just a little bit longer. Otherwise, I would love to hear how everything went. You can email me. Email address is akirking, AKIRKING @nd.gov. I'd love to hear from you guys about the plan, about the presentation, and thank you all very much for being a part of this and listening to me out. I will hang out a little bit longer, but y'all have a great day. Oh, and before I forget, now that I'm looking at text, Kathleen, thank you very much for Todd George's email. Anybody else, if you've been, if you kind of snuck in and I lost you, please, if you don't mind, leave your name, your contact information. I'd love to reach out to you and talk one-on-one with this. Kathleen, yes, I will absolutely be sending out the link as soon as I have it. It will be the same time, 2 o'clock Central. Terry, thank you for complimenting the screen that isn't mine, and I have to be shaded. The glare throws the white balance off. It's horrible. Is this recorded? Yes. YouTube should be automatically recording this for me, and I can send that link out too once I have it. Josh, man, thank you for helping me with all this streaming stuff. This is gobbledygook Star Trek nonsense. Thank you for the help. Yeah, thank you, Casey. Casey is with our NDSU extension. I'm using all of their tech. I'm extremely grateful. But yeah, my camera is running out of batteries, so if I get cut off, nothing personal to anybody out there. All right, thanks very much, Marcus. Kathleen's making you edit that. Please go easy on me. If we ever get to meet in person, I will buy you a beer for a passing grade. All right, folks, thank you all again. I hope to see you back here tomorrow with a fresh battery and hopefully some lessons learned. Take care, everyone. Stay safe out there.